When dusk approached, the wind over the marshlands hushed into uneasy stillness, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Beyond the moss-laden cypress trees, in a nest of dark waters and twisting reeds, lay a place that villagers called the Sunken Glade. It was a lagoon where the moonlight always seemed a shade paler, the breeze a trembling sigh. For many generations, the superstitious from nearby towns told the same tale. Travelers who ventured too far into that drowned clearing heard voices in the night, tantalizing, softly sung words that beckoned them to the water's edge, never to be seen again. If one were to stand on the border between the living forest and that stagnant pool, they would swear they heard a faint melody carried on the spidery night air. A curiosity led me to the worn footpaths that circled the lagoon. I hadn't believed the rumors at first. I was passing through the region on my way to visit old acquaintances in Baymore when I heard the whisperings in the local tavern. The barkeep told me of missing hunters, half-submerged skeletons, phantom lights dancing on the water. The old man sipping whiskey in the corner claimed the lagoon was haunted. Under the faint glow of moonlight, a hush would fall, and from the dark expanse rose an otherworldly singing. My disbelief melted away before the intangible aura of fear that clung to their every word. Something about their genuine terror made me want to see it for myself. On the day I arrived, even the sun seemed reluctant to shine bright. It was midday, but a dense canopy of cypresses kept the place in permanent twilight. Gnats hovered in thick clumps, and the tang of sulfur lingered on the breeze. The water itself looked black, as if dyed with old ink. I circled along the muddy bank, noticing how quiet everything was. No crickets, no frogs, no bird calls. Only the slightest ripple where fish might break the surface, and even those were subdued, as though not daring to disturb their ominous home. When the path tightened, I had to push aside drooping branches, the moss sometimes brushing my cheek like a ghostly hand. A warped wooden dock jutted just out of view beneath a patch of sickly reeds. Rotted and sagging, it bore scratches that could have been claw marks, or perhaps just the effect of time. I paused there, one foot balancing on a warped plank before stepping back in caution. The dock seemed ready to crumble at the slightest pressure. While I squinted at the dark water below, a swirl in the gloom hinted at something moving. My heart gave a jolt, but the swirl vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Dusk was approaching, but my fear had not yet outweighed my curiosity. I pitched a small tent near the lagoon's edge, choosing a spot beneath a broad cypress whose roots tangled like serpents. From this vantage, I could watch the water, and if the rumored chanting started, I would be close enough to observe. All the while, doubt nagged at me. Perhaps I was chasing an old wives' tale. Perhaps I should leave before the sun set completely. Yet I stayed, drawn by the hushed dread of the place. Night came like ink rolling across a canvas. Stars flickered uncertain above the glade, which had no reflection in the dark water. I built a small fire, careful to keep it low, for I wanted my senses attuned to every whisper of wind that stirred the reeds. The hours passed in silence. I drifted in and out of a half-conscious state, lulled by the soft crackle of the embers and the thick, slumberous air. Then a low hum tickled my ears, so faint at first that I thought I was dreaming. But it came again, a gentle resonance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I sat up, heart thudding against my ribs. It was singing, wordless at first, a wave of harmony that sounded both sorrowful and seductive. In the darkness, beyond the drift of my campfire, I saw the outlines of the lagoon trembling with strange movement. A pale mist formed along its surface, creeping outward like the ghost of a drowned spirit. Then the singing grew clearer, each rising note accompanied by an echo from the far side of the glade, as if there were 2, 3, or more voices weaving together. I stood, forgetting the fire, forgetting my sense of caution, and took a step toward the bank. The voices whispered a promise of serenity, soothing every doubt in my mind. Each note washed through me like a gentle current, urging me to come closer, to join the source of that transcendent sound. Even as I recognized the danger, my feet continued forward, squelching in the mud. When my ankles were nearly submerged, a clarity sliced through the haze of my enthrallment. The water lapped at my boots, and the reflection was not mine alone. Next to my silhouette in the moonlit surface was a pale figure, its oval eyes wide, its mouth shaped as though in song. I stumbled backward, gasping. The reflection vanished, or rather it dissolved into the blackness. My heart pounded, and every nerve felt aflame with dread. If I had taken another step, I might not have been able to stop. Waves of uneasy hush followed, as though the lagoon itself realized I had broken free of its enchantment. The singing did not resume that night. Instead, an oppressive silence squeezed the air, leaving me trembling until dawn. When morning finally came, the lagoon looked as harmless and mundane as any other body of water, if a bit murky. Yet the memory of that phantom reflection lingered in my mind. I could still feel the pull of that haunting melody, echoing in my dreams. Determined now more than ever, I set out to talk to the local villagers, hoping to separate truth from legend. In the nearby hamlet, I found a grizzled fisherman named Barrow. He agreed to speak, though I had to cross his palm with silver. Barrow's eyes darted with fear, scanning the horizon for any hint of watchers. "There have always been stories," he said in a whisper. "My father told me how, long ago, there was a settlement at that glade, but the ground was marshy. Their crops rotted in the mud. One summer, the rains wouldn't stop, and the lagoon flooded, swallowing houses, barns, everything. Some drowned, others fled, but the ones who died, some people say they never truly left." As I listened, Barrow's voice cracked, as if dredging up memories was painful. Locals say the drowned villagers wander that lagoon, turned into something else. They sing, calling out to those with open hearts or wandering souls. Sometimes they appear like shimmering illusions, beckoning travelers to follow them into the deep. My own cousin disappeared last autumn while fishing nearby at twilight. His boat was found adrift, empty. The next night, a farmhand heard singing and glimpsed a figure in the water with my cousin's face. That figure was ghost-pale, hair wreathed in reeds, lips parted as though in silent song. He swallowed hard, then fixed me with a look of genuine dread. "Don't go back. Those who set foot there after dark risk never returning." A hush settled after his final word, and I sensed that this was all he would or could share. Despite his warning, I felt compelled to return. Something about the place had snared my imagination. I was not a skeptic any longer, but rather a wary witness. For 3 days I explored the forest around the lagoon by daylight, hoping to discover the remains of the old settlement. In a clearing beyond the main body of water, I found the skeletal ruins of rotted structures. Columns of moldy wood stood among puddles, half buried in silt. When I probed the ground with a walking stick, I discovered a submerged foundation. Indeed, an entire community had once stood here, waiting to be consumed by the marsh. Moss and algae clung to walls that jutted from the ground at strange angles, as if the earth had angled them for a watery grave. The deeper I walked among these fragments of lost civilization, the closer I felt to an unseen presence. The air was thick, and not just from the clammy humidity. It felt as though eyes were watching me. Once, through the tangles of moss, I spied a translucent form, slipping between the broken boards. I couldn't entirely discern its shape. One moment it seemed like a nude figure, sinewy and elongated. The next, it blended into the fog. My heart hammered in my chest, but the paradoxical urge to chase it overcame my fear. I stepped forward, but a sense of dread compelled me to stop. It was gone anyway, the shape dissolving among the twisted roots and watery reflection. Nightfall came, and I returned to my campsite. This time, I lit a perimeter of small torches around my tent, hoping to stave off whatever illusions might creep from the black water. The tactic might have been foolish. a mere human attempt to hold at bay a realm of nightmares, but it offered me a fragile sense of control. I huddled near the campfire, listening to the frogs and insects that had finally dared to chirp in the twilight. When the moon ascended round and pale, casting silver lines across the lagoon, the singing returned. First, a lilting soprano drifted across the water, airy and cunning, so delicate one might think they were imagining it. Then came a chorus, weaving in harmony. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. Shadows stretched across the reeds, and in the weave of that sound, I heard a wordless invitation. Come closer. I gritted my teeth, determined to resist. A clammy sweat broke out along my brow, but though I tried to focus on the flickering torches, I began to see figures at the edge of the lagoon, half submerged in water. They glided with inhuman grace, and their features were just as Barrow had described, hair swirling around their heads, eyes gleaming with unearthly glow, bodies too pale, their lips parted, but the melody seemed to emerge not just from their mouths, but from the dark water and the shining moon and the rustling reeds. It was everywhere, and each note tugged at my soul as though it were unspooling some unspoken longing within me. A voice, my own voice, in the recesses of my mind, whispered that if I dared approach them, I would never return. And yet, my body betrayed me. Slowly, my legs carried me forward, stepping beyond the circle of torches, across the soggy ground. The chanting welled up in intensity, as though the watery phantom sensed my surrender. Somehow, I managed to force my arms to lock at my sides. I looked down, avoiding their gaze. The air quivered with tension. My boot slipped in the mud, and I nearly fell, but the sudden jolt cleared my head like cold water thrown over a dreamer. I jerked myself backward, stumbling toward the light of the torches. The apparitions' voices faltered, replaced by a whispering hush of disappointment. A chill breeze swept through, extinguishing 3 of the torches in a single gust. Darkness crept in, and with an effort I relit them. By the time the flames flickered back to life, the visions in the water were gone. All through that night, I fought the siren call in my head, the echo of those voices that lulled me. Sleep came in fits. Each time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of watery depths, gray hands guiding me gently underwater, voices singing in blissful unison. As the surface closed overhead, I would snap awake gasping, the taste of algae on my tongue, convinced that the lagoon was calling me, even from the realm of dreams. The next day found me haggard, face drawn and spirit shaken. I resolved to keep away from the lagoon. I would study it from a safe distance. Yet some inner compulsion insisted I stay. I reasoned with myself that if I could uncover the lagoon's secret, maybe I could free the souls trapped there. It was this lofty purpose I clung to, my justification to linger in a place of living nightmares. On a cloudy afternoon, I returned to the ruins, deeper in the marsh, armed with nothing more than a lantern and a knife at my belt. I carefully picked my way through the soggy remains of the old village, searching for some artifact or clue. Eventually, I discovered what might have been a gathering hall, a collapsed structure with a partial wooden sign still hanging from a broken beam. Time and the swamp had worn away any lettering, but in the back corner there was a stone dais, half sunken in the sludge. Scraping away the slime, I found carvings etched into the dais symbols I did not recognize, swirling lines and spiral patterns that radiated outward like a whirlpool. Was this dais some type of altar? The shape of the markings, the arrangement of the carved lines, something about them conveyed a sense of reverent dedication. Had the old villagers once worshipped something in that lagoon, or petitioned some being to protect them from the unrelenting floods? An uneasy certainty coiled in my stomach. Perhaps they had angered an ancient force, and it was that force that lingered and devoured them. If that was the case, exorcising it wouldn't be a simple matter. What old pacts had been struck, I wondered, that might bind the drowned souls to this watery domain? A sudden sound made me jerk upright, I whirled to see what appeared to be a woman standing in a shallow pool. Her hair was dark and dripping, her dress in tatters. She had no color, as if the moon had bleached her of life. She observed me with large, penetrating eyes. I dared not move. Her lips parted, revealing a mournful sigh that carried an unspoken lament. The air around me thickened. The hush was almost unbearable. Then she lifted one translucent arm, pointing down the corridor formed by the decaying walls. It was as though she beckoned me forward. When I did not move, she took a step deeper into the water, turning to glance over her shoulder at me. Her expression pleaded. I felt a pang of empathy. She seemed so similar to a drowned victim, guided by an ancient sorrow. Against all caution, I followed. She led me through flooded alleyways of that submerged settlement, weaving between twisted timbers and collapsed roofs. The water rose to my knees, black and frigid. Twice I nearly turned back, but her solemn presence drew me onward. Eventually, she stopped before a partially intact building. Its entrance was a door frame leaning precariously to one side. She drifted inside, and I followed. Within, moonlight fell through the collapsed roof in a thin beam, revealing a filthy interior. Moss and algae covered every surface. In the corner lay a small chest, cracked open. The woman knelt, her shape flickering as though she struggled to remain visible. With trembling hands, I drew closer. Inside the chest, I saw a tarnished locket, a string of pearls, and a waterlogged book. She fixed her eyes upon the locket. Kneeling, I picked it up. A sense of displaced sorrow weighed upon me at once. I held the locket, which had an inscription on the back, "To my beloved, until the waters recede." The woman gazed at it with a longing so profound it twisted my heart. A tear, clear as water, dropped from her eye into the murky puddle at her feet. In that moment, I understood. These ghosts yearned for deliverance, not just the doom of unsuspecting mortals. Something bound them to the lagoon. But it was not purely malicious. Their reality was twisted, subverted by an ancient curse or an unspeakable tragedy. The singing might be part lament, part trapped desire. If I could find a way to sever whatever tethered them here, perhaps they could finally rest. Yet how to accomplish that was a riddle I could not solve. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an odd warmth in my chest, a reflection of her sorrow. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but only a hesitant note emerged, reminiscent of the lullaby that had haunted me earlier. Then, as if recalling the horror that such songs wrought, she clamped her mouth shut. Gently, she placed a cold, damp hand on my fingers, closing them around the locket. The touch was like the final imprint of a dying star, both luminous and heartbreaking. In the next beat, her form flickered and vanished like mist in the wind. I left the building trembling. Clutching the locket, I felt as though I held a key to a locked gate. That night, I did not set up near the lagoon's bank. Instead, I stayed in the old settlement, in a mostly intact structure, hoping the distance would grant me some measure of safety. Yet the singing found me there, whispering through the rotted walls and stagnant pools. It was gentler this time, a sorrowful chant that rose and fell, stirring the water around the ruins. I heard dripping footsteps echo in deserted hallways, glimpsed pale shapes in the corners of my vision. Sleep hovered just beyond my reach, but so did a tangible sense that something was shifting. Deep in the restless night, the singing lulled me into a fugue. My eyes slid closed. A dream overtook me, or perhaps it was a vision. I saw the old villagers, alive. I saw them kneeling at the dais, chanting to a figure wreathed in watery tendrils. A monstrous silhouette, like a living tangle of reeds and feminine contours, rose out of the lagoon, siphoning their pleas and lightning split the sky. Rain pounded the marsh, and with each strike of thunder, the settlement sank deeper into the muddy water. Panic cries mingled with the roar of the storm. The monstrous figure demanded more and more devotion, more sacrifices, in exchange for salvation from the floods. The people, desperate, obeyed. But the rains did not stop, and the lagoon devoured them. Their spirits, bound to the watery labyrinth, rose as lamenting ghosts, cursed to lure others into the same watery doom the entity demanded. I woke with a scream, the taste of brackish water heavy on my tongue. My breath came in shallow bursts. Dawn's pale light filtered through the broken roof, and the singing had ceased. I knew what I had to do. Break the hold of the monstrous being that still dwelled in these waters, if such a feat was possible. Grasping the locket, I made my way to the dais. The wind was still, and the day had a sinister calmness to it. I stood at the dais's center, the swirling patterns almost glowing in the morning light. My voice trembled as I spoke aloud, not knowing what else to do. I asked for the souls to be released, for the ancient contract to be undone. I pressed the locket against the carvings, ignoring the cold slime that coated the stone. I felt a surge, as though the lagoon itself responded to my plea. The water around my boots quivered, and the dais pulsed with a dark luminescence. A shape rose from the lagoon, a colossal swirl of mist and water that coalesced into a distorted feminine visage. Its hollow eyes shone with unstoppable hunger, and its mouth parted in a dreadful wail. Instantly the singing returned, 1,000-fold more potent. The walls of the ruins shook, and the water around me frothed. In that discordant symphony I sensed malice and sorrow interwoven. I clenched the locket and shouted, though my words were lost in the cacophony. Still, I poured my will into a single demand. Set them free! The monstrous apparition roared, its watery limbs lashing out. Pain erupted where one cold tendril struck my shoulder. I stumbled, knees crashing onto the dais, my vision blurred with tears, but I held on to the locket, determined to fight whatever thrall it had woven. As the entity's wail rose to a breaking pitch, I felt a subtle shift in the air. Around us the ghostly villagers appeared, dozens of them. Their forms were translucent, half submerged in swirling eddies, their mouths open in silent lament. One by one they approached the dais. An invisible current seemed to force them down, but they fought upward. Then, in a single poignant moment, they sang, not in the haunting tones that lured mortals, but in mournful harmony against the monstrous creature. It was a lament, yet also an act of defiance. Their combined presence diminished the entity's form, unraveling its watery limbs. I added my own voice, ragged though it was, echoing the plea for release. The dais shuddered, cracks forming along the swirling engravings. The entity shrank, the swirling water that composed its form churning with black sludge. The ghosts sang louder, and the wind around us howled. At last, the monstrous specter fractured, exploding into a shower of sooge-dark droplets. A shroud of silence fell as the water stilled, and the swirling lines in the dais collapsed into dust. The ghosts, freed from their prison, began to fade. Each one turned a last, sorrowful glance upon me before dissolving like fog. I slumped on the dais, exhaustion weighing me down. The locket still lay in my hand, though it was now dull, stripped of whatever lingering magic it held. The lagoon no longer felt oppressive. Birds cried in the distance. For the first time since I arrived, I heard the soft chirp of cicadas. The sunlight seemed a shade brighter, and a breeze ruffled the reeds gently. Wincing at the ache in my shoulder, I hobbled back toward the forest. By the time I regained the edge of the lagoon, I saw it in a new light. The water was no longer ink black, but merely a brackish green. It still carried the memory of tragedy in its depths, yet the air lacked the malignant chill it once held. I stood there for a long while, watching the wind ripple across the surface. A sense of profound sadness washed over me, along with a faint hope that the restless souls had at last found peace. I gathered my campsite and prepared to leave. Before I went, I walked once more to the bank, where I had nearly been lured in by that fatal song. As I stared into the lagoon, An echo of that ghostly melody whispered in my mind, gentle this time, like a farewell. I dropped the locket into the waters, letting it sink into the depths, a final offering to the sunken glade. Then I shouldered my pack and turned my back on the cursed lagoon. The path out of the marsh was slow, my boots snagging in mud. Sunlight broke through the cypress canopy, illuminating the way. While part of me feared a last desperate summons from those watery ghosts, none came. An oddly serene quiet enveloped the forest. Perhaps the lagoon would never be wholly safe. The marsh would always hold its dark hush and watery secrets, but at least now the dreadful chorus had been silenced. Even as I left that place behind, I carried its imprint in my mind. The pale-faced apparitions, the rotting ruins, the monstrous entity that fed on sorrow and devotion. There was a hollow ache in me, knowing that countless lives had been claimed by that water over the centuries. But their final defiance, their last unified lament, had shattered the chains that bound them. Somewhere in that realm beyond mortal perception, they had found release. Occasionally, after that day, I would wake in the night, thinking I heard distant singing carried on the wind. My heart would hammer, memory flaring, but the chill dread would pass, and I would remind myself that the sunken glade's hold was broken, its siren voice quelled. At those times, I would bow my head in quiet respect for the souls who once haunted those waters. Their story, soaked in tragedy, was woven into the moss and mud. Yet, they no longer lay in wait for unsuspecting wanderers. No longer were they slaves to an ancient bargain. Silence was their final rest. No one asked me to speak of what had transpired there. No one would have believed me anyway. But in the quiet corners of my memory, I still see those pale figures, singing for their release under a sky tinted ghostly by the moon. Perhaps in some sense, the drowned souls still remember the living, even as they drift through the infinite hush that follows release from a centuries-old curse. And so I departed that marsh, carrying with me a story fit for hushed tavern corners and whispered fireside confessions, one I might dare to tell only to those truly willing to listen. Out beyond the cypress trees, beyond the stagnant pools and the rotted docks, the wind once more carried the sounds of everyday life. Birds soared overhead, the forest breathed, and in a pocket of the world where nightmares once reigned, the lagoon lay quiet, its waters clear enough that it almost appeared to reflect the sky.